All right, so if most of your philosophy experience comes from the modern era, you probably think of ethics as, well, a bunch of rules, right? Or maybe some tough dilemmas, or utilitarian calculations. But what if there's a totally different way to frame the whole thing? For Thomas Aquinas, ethics wasn't a rule book. It was more like a blueprint for the human soul. He saw virtue as this incredibly practical, integrated system for becoming the person you're actually meant to be. Think of this as your user's guide to that system. So, where do we start? Here's our game plan. First, we're going to have to recover the original meaning of a really important virtue. Then we'll map out Aquinas' 4 big pillars of character and see how one specific virtue basically holds the whole structure together. After that, we'll dig into the critical difference between knowing what's good and actually doing what's good. And we'll wrap up by seeing how this whole system leads to a kind of freedom that's way beyond just following rules. Okay, let's dive right in with a virtue that, honestly, has kind of been misunderstood over the years: prudence. And this slide just nails the problem. Today, if we call someone prudent, what do we mean? We probably mean they're cautious, maybe a little timid. We think of things like calculative self-interest, or just buying insurance. But for Aquinas and the classical world, prudentia, or what the Greeks called phronesis, was something completely different. It wasn't about being timid. It was about being wise. It meant having the insight to see a situation clearly and make the right call. It wasn't about avoiding risk. It was about acting well. Okay, so if prudence isn't just about playing it safe, what is it? Well, to really get it, we need to see the bigger picture, the structure that Aquinas builds around it. And he gives us these 4 foundational pillars that basically map our entire inner life. They're called the cardinal virtues, and the name itself is a fantastic clue. It comes from the Latin word cardo, which means hinge, like the hinge of a door. St. Ambrose came up with this name because he saw that the entire moral life, the very door to human flourishing, literally swings on these 4 things. So you see, it's not just a random list of good traits. They are the core mechanism for living a good life. And this is where you can see just how deep Aquinas' psychology goes. Look at this table. For him, a virtue isn't some abstract ideal floating in the clouds. No, it's the perfection of a specific power of the soul. Prudence perfects our practical reason. Justice perfects our will. And then you have temperance and fortitude, which are all about getting our appetites in order, our desire for pleasure, and a response to fear and difficulty. It's a truly holistic system for organizing our inner world. Now let's zoom back in on the linchpin, the one virtue that pulls all the others together and gives them direction. And that, of course, is prudence. Aquinas' definition is so precise: recta ratio agabilium. It sounds fancy, but it just means right reason about things to be done. And notice he calls it an intellectual virtue. That's key. It's a skill of the mind, specifically our practical reason, that lets us see the truth in a specific real-world situation and apply the right moral principles. It's the bridge between knowing good in general and doing the right thing right here and right now. And it's not some vague gut feeling. For Aquinas, it's a clear 3-step process. First comes counseling. You think through your options. Second is judging. You make the correct call on what to do. But the final and most important step is commanding. This is the part where your reason says, okay, do this, and actually puts the plan into motion. This quote from Aquinas really says it all. Without prudence, the other virtues are basically flying blind. I mean, you can have a strong desire to be just, but without prudence, how do you know what the truly just action is in this particular, messy, real-life situation? Prudence is like the charioteer of the virtues, steering all the others. This creates something philosophers call a virtuous circle. See, the virtues are all connected. You can't be truly brave without prudence telling you when to fight and when to not fight. But at the same time, you can't be truly prudent if your desires or your fears are all out of whack, because they'll cloud your judgment. You don't get them one by one like items on a checklist. They all have to grow together. Okay, this next part is a really crucial distinction, especially for anyone trained to think like a modern philosopher. For Aquinas, there is a world of difference between virtues that are for knowing and virtues that are for doing. So on one side, you've got what he calls speculative virtues, things like science or wisdom. Their job is to perfect your intellect so you can know the truth, like knowing how a star works. And that's great, but that knowledge is non-transformative. Knowing physics doesn't automatically make you a good person. Then, on the other side, you have the moral virtues. Their whole purpose is to perfect your appetite, your will, your desires, so that you actually choose and love the good. And these are transformative. They fundamentally shape who you are. Aquinas gives us this really beautiful analogy. Think of a sculptor. First, the sculptor needs speculative knowledge. She has to just stare at the block of marble, right? She has to understand its properties, its grain, its potential. But then she needs the practical virtue, the art, to actually pick up the chisel and bring the statue to life. You need both, the knowing and the doing. So this split between knowing and doing, it helps us answer one of the oldest questions in philosophy. Why do people sometimes know exactly what the right thing is, but then go and do the wrong thing anyway? Well, Aquinas has a very sharp answer for this. He makes this distinction between facultas and usus. Facultas is just the capacity or the ability to do something, and usus is the good use of that ability. So an intellectual virtue, like being really good at logic, gives you the facultas to reason well, but it doesn't guarantee you'll use that skill for good things. A brilliant logician can just as easily construct a flawless argument for a horrible cause. The use of that capacity, that depends on your will. And this gets us to the heart of the difference between having a conscience and making a prudent choice. For Aquinas, your conscience is a purely cognitive thing. It's like a little alarm in your head that says, hey, that action violates this principle. It's just data. In fact, Aquinas famously says that a bad person can have a perfectly correct conscience. He knows what's right. The real moment of truth is the choice. That's where your knowledge meets your will and your desires. That's what reveals who you really are. So what's the end game here? What is the whole point of all this hard work of building virtue? For Aquinas, it's not about becoming some kind of perfect moral robot who never breaks a rule. It's about achieving real freedom. This is the true payoff of virtue. A virtuous person doesn't need to pull out a moral rulebook every time they face a decision. Through practice, their reason and their desires get so in sync, so well ordered, that they develop what Aquinas calls a confident command. It's like an instinct, an ability to just see the right thing to do in a new situation, and crucially, have the inner harmony to actually do it easily, and maybe even with joy. And that really leaves us with the big takeaway question from all this. For Aquinas, the main point of ethics isn't really to answer, what should I do? It's to answer, who should I become? So what if the goal isn't just to learn the rules of the good life, but to actually transform ourselves into the kind of people who love what's good and choose it naturally?